I never thought a phone call from my mother could feel like a punch to the gut, but there I was, standing in my penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, feeling exactly that way. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the glittering city lights back at me as I held the phone against my ear, listening to Mom's excited voice telling me about Megan's grand plans for her 60th birthday dinner. "Oh honey, you absolutely must come home for this. Megan has arranged everything at the Gilded Spoon, you know, that fancy restaurant everyone talks about. She says it's the most elegant place in the county." Mom's voice bubbled with anticipation, and I could practically hear her beaming through the phone. "The whole family will be there, and Megan has been working so hard to make it perfect for me." The irony wasn't lost on me. The Gilded Spoon. Of all the restaurants in our small hometown, it had to be that one. I glanced at the contract spread across my mahogany desk, the ink still fresh from this morning's signing. Vance Hospitality Group had just acquired a chain of upscale restaurants, and the Gilded Spoon was the crown jewel of the collection. My signature was right there on the dotted line, making me the new owner of the very establishment where my family would be celebrating. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Oh, I'm so glad. You know how Megan gets when she puts her mind to something. She's been talking about this for weeks, making sure everything is just perfect. She even mentioned something about having a special surprise for you." There was a pause, and I could hear the slight hesitation in her voice. "You two will get along nicely, won't you, dear? I know you've both been busy with your own lives, but family is so important." That familiar knot formed in my stomach. Even from 300 miles away, I could feel the delicate dance my mother always performed, trying to keep peace between Megan and me. She never directly addressed the tension, never acknowledged the subtle jabs and passive-aggressive comments that had defined my relationship with my older sister for years. Instead, she smoothed over everything with hopeful wishes and gentle reminders about family loyalty. "Of course, Mom, I'll be there with bells on." After hanging up, I stared out at the city skyline, my reflection ghost-like in the darkened glass. The acquisition had taken months of careful negotiation, discretion, and strategic planning. I had deliberately kept my business dealings private from my family, knowing they wouldn't understand or, worse, would find ways to diminish my success. To them, I was still little Chloe who worked in food service, as my father dismissively called it. They had no idea that my food service job had evolved into a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. The drive home took me through familiar countryside, past fields I had played in as a child in the small downtown where I had dreamed of bigger things. I had rented a modest sedan for the trip, leaving my Tesla back in the city. There was no point in drawing unnecessary attention to myself, not when I knew Megan was already planning whatever show she had in store for me. The family house looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college 15 years ago. Same white picket fence, same rose bushes my mother tended with religious devotion, same warm path leading to the front porch where we used to sit on summer evenings. But now it felt smaller somehow, like I was seeing it through different eyes. Megan's voice reached me before I even made it to the front door. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence." She appeared in the doorway, perfectly put together as always, her blonde hair styled in a way that probably took an hour but looked effortless. "I was starting to think you might be too busy counting your pennies to make it home for Mom's birthday. Good to see you too, Megan." I climbed the porch steps, overnight bag in hand, and accepted her brief, perfunctory hug. Even that simple gesture felt calculated, performed for the benefit of Mom, who appeared behind her with flour-dusted hands and a warm smile. "Chloe, oh, sweetie, you look wonderful. A little thin, though. Are you eating enough?" Mom wiped her hands on her apron and pulled me into a real hug, the kind that reminded me why I kept coming back despite everything else. "I'm fine, Mom, just busy with work." "That's what I keep telling her." Kyle's voice drifted from the living room. My brother-in-law appeared in the hallway, beer in hand despite it being barely past noon. "She needs to find herself a nice man and settle down instead of chasing after this career nonsense." I bit back my immediate response, the words I wanted to say about how my career nonsense had just closed a deal worth more than Kyle would make in his lifetime. Instead, I smiled and nodded, the same placating gesture I had perfected over years of family gatherings. "Speaking of work," Megan interjected, her tone sugar-sweet but with an edge I recognized all too well. "I hope you brought something nice to wear tonight. The Gilded Spoon has a dress code, you know. Very upscale. Not like those little diners you're used to." The comment stung, just as it was intended to. Megan had always had a gift for making her insults sound like concern, wrapping her barbs in sisterly advice. She knew exactly how to push my buttons, how to make me feel small and insignificant with just a few carefully chosen words. "I'm sure I'll manage," I replied, keeping my voice level. Later that afternoon, I presented Mom with my gift, a vintage Cartier watch I had found at an estate auction in the city. It was elegant and timeless, exactly the sort of thing Mom would treasure. Her eyes lit up when she opened the box, and for a moment, I felt that warm glow of having made her happy. "Oh, Chloe, it's beautiful, but you shouldn't have spent so much money on me. You deserve beautiful things, Mom." Megan appeared at Mom's shoulder, examining the watch with a critical eye. "It is lovely," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "though I hope Mom won't feel obligated to wear it everywhere. Some people might get the wrong impression, might think she's putting on airs." She gently moved the watch box to the side table, as if it were a curiosity rather than a treasured gift. Sometimes the most thoughtful presents are the simple ones that really fit someone's lifestyle. Dad wandered over to see what the fuss was about, glancing at the watch with the same expression he might give to an interesting but ultimately impractical gadget. "Fancy," he said, which from him was about as close to approval as I was likely to get. "Probably cost more than my truck payment." The comment wasn't meant to be cruel, but it accomplished what Megan's subtler approach had failed to do. It made me feel embarrassed about my success, guilty for having nice things when my family still worried about monthly bills. It was a dynamic I had never quite learned how to navigate. How do you share your happiness with people who seem determined to view your achievements as either showing off or somehow taking away from them? That evening, as we prepared to leave for the restaurant, I caught my reflection in the guest bedroom mirror. I had chosen a simple but elegant black dress, something that would fit in at the Gilded Spoon without drawing too much attention. My hair was pulled back in a classic chignon, and I wore the pearl earrings that had been a graduation gift from my grandmother. I looked successful but not ostentatious, professional but not intimidating. It was a careful balance I had learned to strike in my business life, and I found myself applying those same skills to family dinner. The drive to the Gilded Spoon was filled with chatter about local gossip and family news. Megan held court from the front passenger seat of Dad's truck, detailing all the arrangements she had made for the evening. She had invited several family friends and some of Kyle's colleagues, turning what could have been an intimate family dinner into something closer to a social event. "I even arranged for a special table layout," she said, glancing back at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought it would be fun to do something a little different, give everyone a unique experience." The restaurant was as beautiful as its reputation suggested. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in crisp white linens, and the soft murmur of conversation created an atmosphere of refined elegance. The hostess, a young woman with an impeccable smile, greeted us warmly and led us toward a private dining room that Megan had reserved for the occasion. The room was stunning, with dark wood paneling and oil paintings of pastoral scenes. A large table dominated the center, set for 12 people with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses that caught the light from the overhead fixture. Fresh flowers adorned the center of the table, and everything looked perfect for a celebration, except for the small table tucked into the corner near the service entrance. It was barely large enough for one person, clearly meant as a temporary resting spot for staff rather than a dining table for guests. A single-place setting sat on its surface, looking lonely and out of place in the elegant room. "Now, before everyone sits down," Megan announced, her voice carrying across the room as the rest of our party filed in, "I have a special surprise for my little sister." She gestured toward the corner table with theatrical flair. "Since Chloe works in food service, I thought it would be educational for her to have a front row seat to observe how a truly upscale establishment operates. Consider it professional development." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the room, I could see the uncomfortable expressions on the faces of our relatives and family friends. Dad shifted awkwardly and looked away. Kyle actually chuckled, as if this were some clever joke rather than a deliberate humiliation. Even the restaurant staff who were arranging the final place setting seemed embarrassed by what they were witnessing. "Megan," Mom's voice was soft but troubled, "that doesn't seem quite right." "Oh, Mom, don't worry about it. Chloe understands, don't you?" Megan's tone was bright and cheerful, but her eyes held a challenge. "Besides, we needed the extra space at the main table for Kyle's boss and his wife. I'm sure Chloe doesn't mind helping out the family by being flexible. She's always been so accommodating." The room fell silent, waiting for my response. I could feel the weight of their stares, the pity from some and the uncomfortable relief from others who were grateful not to be in my position. This was the moment Megan had been building toward, the culmination of years of subtle undermining and carefully orchestrated humiliations. She had finally found a way to put me in my place publicly, and she was clearly enjoying every second of it. For a heartbeat, I considered walking out. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to refuse to participate in this elaborate show of disrespect. But then I saw my mother's face, the confusion and hurt there, and I knew I couldn't ruin her birthday, even for this. "What a creative idea," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for thinking of my professional development, Megan. I'm sure it will be very enlightening." The relief in the room was palpable as I made my way to the corner table. Conversation resumed, and the evening began to take on the appearance of normalcy, though I noticed several people glancing in my direction with expressions that ranged from sympathy to curiosity. The table was indeed meant for staff. The single chair was uncomfortable, clearly designed for brief breaks rather than extended sitting. From my position, I had a perfect view of the service station where waitstaff came to collect clean glasses and silverware. It was exactly as humiliating as Megan had intended it to be. A young waiter approached my table, looking genuinely distressed. He was perhaps 25, with kind eyes and an apologetic expression. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about this. This isn't really a guest table. Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" "It's fine," I assured him, though we both knew it wasn't. "Just part of the family dynamics." He lingered for a moment, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. "My name is Leo," he said quietly. "If you need anything at all, please just let me know." As the evening progressed, the contrast between my isolation and the celebration happening just a few feet away became increasingly stark. I could hear bursts of laughter from the main table, the clink of glasses as toasts were made, the warm conversation that comes with good food and good company. Meanwhile, I sat alone, picking at the bread roll Leo had quietly brought me, feeling like an outsider at my own mother's birthday party. Megan made sure to include me in the performance, though. Every so often, she would call out to me across the room, "How's the view over there, Chloe? Getting lots of professional insights?" Or, "Make sure you're taking notes. This could really help with your little restaurant job." Each comment was delivered with a laugh, as if we were all in on some wonderful joke together. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the satisfaction she derived from my obvious discomfort. This wasn't spontaneous teasing between sisters. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to put me in my place and reinforce the family hierarchy that had me firmly at the bottom. The worst part wasn't the discomfort or even the humiliation. It was the way everyone else went along with it. Dad, who had always prided himself on being fair and protective of his daughters, said nothing. Kyle actively participated, making jokes about my special seating arrangement. Even some of the family friends, people I had known since childhood, seemed to accept that this was just how things were between Megan and me. Only Mom seemed genuinely troubled by the situation, but her objections were gentle and easily overruled. "Megan, dear, maybe we could rearrange things a bit?" she suggested at one point. "Mom, everything is already set up perfectly," Megan replied smoothly. "Besides, Chloe said she was fine with it. Didn't you, Chloe?" All eyes turned to me again, and I found myself nodding, playing my assigned role in Megan's script. "Absolutely, this is perfect." It was Leo who provided the small kindnesses that kept me from completely falling apart. He brought me a proper napkin when he noticed I only had a paper one. He made sure my water glass was always full and quietly delivered a small appetizer plate when he saw I had nothing to eat while the main table enjoyed their first course. His gestures were discreet and professional, but they were also deeply human, small acknowledgments that what was happening wasn't right. "Thank you," I whispered to him during one of his passes by my table. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect," he replied quietly, and I felt a surge of gratitude that at least one person in that room seemed to understand what was really going on. The turning point came about halfway through the main course. The door to our private dining room opened, and a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention. I recognized him from my research on the restaurant, though he had no idea who I was. Mr. Dubois, the regional operations director who I had specifically asked to retain when we acquired the restaurant chain, surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a hospitality professional. His gaze swept over the main table, taking in the elegant place settings and the obvious celebration taking place. Then his eyes found me. I watched his expression change from polite professional interest to confusion, then to what looked like genuine alarm. He stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, as if trying to process what he was seeing. Then, without a word to anyone else in the room, he walked directly toward my corner table. The conversation at the main table began to die down as people noticed the well-dressed stranger who had entered their private party. Megan looked up with a bright, slightly predatory smile she reserved for people she perceived as important. "Mr. Dubois," she called out, rising from her chair. "How wonderful that you stopped by. We're having such a lovely evening here." But Mr. Dubois didn't acknowledge her greeting. His attention was entirely focused on me as he approached my small table in the corner. When he reached me, he did something that sent a shock through the entire room. He bowed slightly, a gesture of unmistakable respect. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. "I had no idea you would be visiting us this evening. Please forgive me, but there seems to be some sort of mistake with your seating arrangement." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the confused stares from my family, see Megan's face shifting from confidence to bewilderment. Mr. Dubois straightened up and turned to face the room, his expression serious and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice formal and commanding, "I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Chloe Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Hospitality Group, and as of this morning, the new owner of the Gilded Spoon." The words seemed to echo in the stunned silence. I could see the exact moment when comprehension dawned on each face in the room. Megan's mouth actually fell open, and Kyle's beer glass stopped halfway to his lips. Dad's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline, and Mom's hand went to her throat in surprise. Mr. Dubois wasn't finished. "I was told that we had a guest who needed temporary seating, but I was not informed that it was the owner of this establishment." His tone had taken on a steely edge. "Might I ask who made this seating arrangement?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Megan, for perhaps the first time in her life, seemed completely at a loss for words. The confident, controlling persona she had worn all evening crumbled, leaving behind something smaller and more vulnerable. "I don't understand," she stammered. "Chloe works at some little restaurant. She's never said anything about owning." "The Vance Hospitality Group owns 47 upscale establishments across the Northeast," Mr. Dubois said crisply. "Ms. Vance has been featured in Forbes' Restaurant Business magazine and was named one of the top entrepreneurs under 40 by Incorporated magazine last year." I had remained silent through this exchange, watching the faces of my family as they processed this information. Years of dismissive comments, condescending advice, and casual disregard were being reevaluated in real time. The little restaurant job they had mocked was revealed to be an empire worth more than they had ever imagined. "Mr. Dubois," I said quietly, standing up from my uncomfortable chair, "would it be possible to arrange a proper chair at the main table? I'd like to celebrate my mother's birthday with my family." "Of course, Ms. Vance, right away." As he hurried to arrange a place sitting at the main table, the room remained silent. I walked slowly from my corner to the center of the room, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. When Mr. Dubois had arranged a chair for me at the head of the table, directly across from where Mom was sitting, I took my seat and looked around at the faces of my family. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said softly. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, dreamlike atmosphere. Conversation resumed, but it was stilted and careful. People who had ignored me all evening suddenly wanted to hear about my business, my travels, my success. Megan barely spoke, picking at her food and occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The questions came in waves. How long had I owned restaurants? Why hadn't I told them? Was I really successful, or was this some kind of misunderstanding? Each query revealed just how little they had bothered to learn about my actual life over the years. They had been so convinced that I was the family failure that they had never looked closely enough to see what I had actually become. Kyle, loosened by alcohol and stress, eventually provided the context that explained so much about the evening's earlier dynamic. "You have to understand," he said to one of his colleagues, "things have been really tight for us lately. The company's been laying people off, and we're behind on some payments. This dinner was supposed to be a chance to impress my boss, show that we're the kind of people who belong in places like this." The admission hung in the air, revealing the desperation that had driven Megan's need to put me in my place. It wasn't just sibling rivalry or casual cruelty. It was the lashing out of someone who felt trapped and powerless, trying to regain some sense of control by diminishing someone else. I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Anger at the years of disrespect and dismissal, sadness for the relationship we might have had if things had been different, and, surprisingly, a kind of pity for the position Megan had put herself in through her own choices and attitudes. The evening finally wound down, and we made our way back to the family home. The car ride was awkward, filled with half-started conversations and long silences. Megan stared out the window, while Kyle seemed to shrink further into himself with each mile. Dad kept glancing at me in the rear-view mirror as if seeing me for the first time, and Mom reached back to squeeze my hand but didn't say much. Back at the house, people scattered quickly to their respective rooms. I was staying in my childhood bedroom, which Mom had kept exactly as I had left it when I went to college. The pink wallpaper and teenage posters felt surreal after the evening's revelations, like stepping back into a version of myself that no longer existed. I was sitting on the edge of my old twin bed, checking emails on my phone when there was a soft knock on the door. I expected it to be Mom, wanting to talk about everything that had happened, but it was Megan who appeared in the doorway. She looked smaller than she had earlier, less polished and controlled. Her perfect makeup was smudged, and her carefully styled hair was coming loose from its pins. She stood in the doorway for a moment, as if gathering courage, before stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble, "and I need you to be honest with me." I set my phone aside and looked at her, waiting. "How long have you known? About the money troubles, I mean." Kyle's job situation. It was an interesting question, one that revealed more about her mindset than she probably realized. I didn't know anything about your finances until Kyle mentioned it tonight, I said truthfully. She nodded slowly, as if processing this information. Then tonight wasn't payback for how I treated you? I considered the question carefully. Tonight was Mom's birthday dinner. I came home to celebrate with my family. Everything else was just coincidence. The word coincidence seemed to hit her hard. She sank into my old desk chair, looking suddenly exhausted. God, Chloe, all these years, I've been treating you like you were still that awkward kid who couldn't do anything right. And you've been building a business, I finished, learning how to stand on my own. Growing up, we sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside, I could hear the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling down for the night. Dogs barking in the distance, the hum of air conditioners, the occasional car passing on the street where I had learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss and dreamed of escaping to bigger things. Why didn't you ever tell us? Megan asked finally. About your success, I mean. We're your family. It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself many times over the years. At first, it was because the business was so new and uncertain. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up or have to explain if it failed. Then, later, I paused, trying to find the right words. It became clear that you all had a very specific idea of who I was and what I was capable of, and that idea didn't leave much room for success. That's not true, she protested, but the words lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked me about my work in a way that suggested you thought it might be going well? When did anyone express interest in my life beyond making sure I was okay and not getting too big for my britches? The questions hung between us, and I could see Megan struggling with the truth they represented. Our family dynamic had been built on certain assumptions about our respective roles, and challenging those assumptions meant confronting some uncomfortable realities about how we had chosen to relate to each other. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, for tonight. For a lot of things, actually. I don't know why I felt like I needed to put me in my place? I suggested gently. She winced. Yeah, that. I studied my sister's face in the dim light from my old desk lamp. She looked vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were children, before the competition and resentment had built up between us. For a moment, I could see the girl who had taught me to braid friendship bracelets and had defended me when Tommy Morrison pulled my hair in 3rd grade. You know what the really sad part is? I said, if you had just asked, I would have helped, with the money troubles, with Kyle's job situation, with whatever you needed. You're my sister, that has to count for something. Tears started to form in her eyes. Would you help? I mean, I considered the question seriously. The immediate answer was yes, of course I would help family members in genuine need, but the evening had shown me that the dynamic between us was too toxic for simple financial assistance to fix. Any help I provided would need to come with conditions that addressed the underlying problems in our relationship. I'm not going to write you a check, if that's what you're asking, I said finally. Money without accountability just enables the same behaviors that got you into trouble in the first place. Her face fell, and I could see the disappointment there. Part of her had been hoping for a quick fix, a magical solution that would solve her problems without requiring any real change on her part. But, I continued, I do have a business proposition for you. She looked up, curiosity replacing disappointment. The Gilded Spoon is going to need a new event coordinator, someone to handle private parties, special occasions, corporate events. It's entry level, but it's a real job with real responsibilities and room for growth. The salary won't make you rich, but it would be steady income while Kyle figures out his next move. Megan stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity. Whether you make it into something worthwhile is up to you. But I don't have any experience in restaurant management. No, but you do know how to organize events. You proved that tonight, even if the execution was questionable. And you understand what customers in this market want from an upscale dining experience. Those are teachable skills. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. I could see her weighing her options, considering what it would mean to work for her younger sister, to start over in a new field, to swallow her pride and admit that she needed help. There would be conditions, I added. You'd report to the general manager, not to me directly. You'd be expected to start at the bottom and work your way up based on merit, not family connections. And if you take the job, the attitude toward me that I saw tonight stops completely. I won't tolerate being disrespected by my own employees, family or not. The conditions were non-negotiable, and I could see that she understood that. This wasn't charity disguised as business. It was a genuine opportunity that came with genuine expectations and genuine consequences for failure. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Take as much time as you need. She stood up to leave, pausing at the door. Chloe, thank you for not walking out tonight, for not making Mom's birthday about our drama, for this conversation. After she left, I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling where I had once taped glow-in-the-dark stars in the shape of constellations I had learned about in science class. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was back in the same room where I had once dreamed of escaping the limitations my family placed on me, and now I was the one offering a way out of limitations they had placed on themselves. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the reality of the previous evening's revelations settled in. Dad, who had always been a man of few words, surprised me by asking if I wanted to take a walk before breakfast. We ended up at the old elementary school playground where Megan and I had spent countless hours as children. Your mother and I, we didn't know, he said as we sat on the swings that seemed much smaller than I remembered. About your business, about how well you've done for yourself. I know, Dad. We're proud of you, you know. We might not have shown it the right way, but we are. It was perhaps the most direct emotional statement I had ever heard from my father, and it caught me off guard. Thank you. That means a lot. This job offer you made to Megan, is it real, or are you just trying to be kind? I considered the question. It would be easy to frame the offer as simple family loyalty, but that wouldn't be entirely honest. It's real. Megan has skills that could translate well to event coordination, and the restaurant could use someone who understands the local market. But she'll have to prove herself just like any other employee. Dad nodded approvingly. Good. She needs to learn that respect is earned, not given. We walked home in comfortable silence, and I felt something shift in my relationship with my father. It was subtle, but for the first time in years, he seemed to see me as an adult rather than the child who had once lived in his house. The rest of the morning was filled with the kind of awkward conversations that follow dramatic revelations. Mom fussed over me, alternating between pride in my success and worry that I had been struggling alone all these years. Various relatives called to congratulate me and, not so subtly, to see if my newfound wealth might benefit them in some way. Kyle, surprisingly, was the most straightforward in his approach. I owe you an apology, he said when he found me alone in the kitchen. Last night was wrong, and I should have spoken up. Thank you for saying that. Megan told me about your job offer. Is there anything like that for someone in my situation? I appreciated his directness. What's your background again? Sales, mostly. Some management experience. I'm good with people when I'm not drinking too much and feeling sorry for myself. His honesty was refreshing. Send me your resume. I can't promise anything, but I might know of some opportunities in the hospitality industry that would fit your skill set. Relief flooded his face. Thank you. Really, I know I haven't given you much reason to help me. 2 weeks later, I was back in New York, settling into the rhythm of running a business that had just expanded significantly with the new acquisitions. Megan had called to accept the position at the Gilded Spoon, and I had arranged for her to start with a 2-week training program at one of our more established locations. Leo, the kind waiter who had shown me such consideration during that awful dinner, had been promoted to assistant manager trainee. When I asked Mr. Dubois about it, he simply said, anyone who shows that level of character under pressure is management material. I made it a point to visit the Gilded Spoon regularly during Megan's first few months on the job. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the entitled attitude and casual cruelty that had defined her behavior toward me for so long. In their place was a focused professionalism and genuine enthusiasm for her work. She was good at it, too. Her natural organizational skills and social awareness translated well to event coordination. She developed a reputation for creating memorable experiences for guests, and her bookings numbers consistently exceeded expectations. Our relationship remained formal and professional during business hours, but slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something personal as well. It started with brief conversations after work, progressed to the occasional coffee meeting, and eventually evolved into something that resembled actual sisterhood. The real test came 6 months later, when Mom called to tell me that Megan and Kyle were expecting their first child. I was genuinely happy for them, and when I offered to host the baby shower at one of my restaurants, Megan accepted with tears in her eyes. I don't deserve this, she said during the planning meeting. After everything I put you through, you have every right to want nothing to do with me. You're right, I agreed. You don't deserve it. But that's not really the point, is it? Family isn't about what we deserve. It's about choosing to show up for each other even when it's difficult. The baby shower was beautiful, filled with the kind of warmth and celebration that had been missing from our family gatherings for years. Watching Megan open gifts and laugh with friends, seeing the genuine joy on her face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, pride in my sister. Kyle had found a new job in sales for a hotel chain, leveraging contacts I had provided but succeeding entirely on his own merits. He had cut back significantly on his drinking and seemed genuinely committed to becoming the kind of father and husband his family deserved. The evening of the shower, as we were cleaning up, Megan pulled me aside. I need to tell you something, she said. I've been thinking a lot about that night at the Gilded Spoon, about why I did what I did. I waited, not sure where this conversation was heading.
I think I was jealous, she continued. Not just of your success, but of your courage. You had the guts to leave home to take risks to build something from nothing. And I stayed here, playing it safe, convincing myself that I was the responsible one when really I was just scared. Her words surprised me with their honesty. You weren't wrong to want stability, Megan. There's nothing shameful about choosing a different path. But there was something shameful about trying to tear you down because I was unhappy with my own choices. I spent so many years telling myself that your dreams were unrealistic, that you were bound to fail, because it made me feel better about not having the courage to chase my own dreams. We stood in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had brought our family together in a way that felt genuine for the first time in years. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. What dreams? I asked gently. I wanted to be a teacher, she said, almost whispering the words as if they were a secret. Elementary school. I had this whole plan when I was in college, but then I met Kyle and he had different ideas about what kind of life we should build together. He thought teaching was too uncertain, too low paying. So I took the safe route, got an office job, told myself I could always go back to teaching later. It's not too late, I said. You're what, 32? You could still go back to school, get your teaching certification. She laughed, but it wasn't bitter. Actually, I've been thinking about that. Working at the restaurant has reminded me how much I enjoy creating experiences for people, and teaching is really just another form of that. Kyle's new job has benefits, and the insurance would cover education costs. The restaurant would support flexible scheduling if you decided to pursue it, I offered. Good employees are worth investing in. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my parents, who had stayed late to help with cleanup. Dad was carrying a stack of chairs while Mom gathered up decorative items, both of them moving with the easy coordination of a couple who had been working together for decades. Girls, you don't need to stay, Mom said when she saw us. Kyle and some of the other men can handle the heavy lifting. It's my restaurant, Mom. I think I can manage to supervise the cleanup. The words came out more sharply than I had intended, and I saw Mom's face fall slightly. Even after everything that had happened, she still sometimes defaulted to treating me like the little girl who needed protection rather than the woman who had built a business empire. Of course, dear. I just meant. I know what you meant, I said more gently. But I need you to start seeing me as I am now, not as who I used to be. Dad looked up from his chair stacking. Your mother's proud of you, Chloe. We both are. It's just taking us some time to adjust our thinking. It was a fair point. Change was difficult for everyone, and I had revealed my transformed circumstances in perhaps the most dramatic way possible. I couldn't expect decades of family dynamics to shift overnight simply because the truth was finally out in the open. I understand that, I said. But I need you to understand something too. I didn't hide my success to hurt you or because I was ashamed of where I came from. I hid it because I was tired of having my accomplishments minimized or explained away. I needed space to become who I was meant to be without constantly defending my choices. Mom set down the centerpiece she had been holding and looked at me with tears in her eyes. Did we really make you feel that way? Like you couldn't share good news with your own family? The question hung in the air, and I could see that she genuinely didn't understand how her well-meaning attempts to keep peace had contributed to the problem. She had always seen herself as the family mediator, smoothing over conflicts and encouraging everyone to get along. But in practice, that had often meant asking me to be more understanding of Megan's behavior rather than addressing the behavior itself. Not intentionally, I said carefully. But yes, sometimes. When someone's success is consistently met with warnings about pride or reminders to stay humble, it sends a message that achievement is something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. The insight seemed to hit her hard. She had always prided herself on being supportive, and the realization that her support had sometimes felt like criticism was clearly painful. I'm sorry, she said simply. I thought I was protecting you from becoming too focused on material things. I didn't realize I was making you feel like you couldn't be proud of your accomplishments. It was the kind of honest conversation our family had rarely engaged in, the kind that acknowledged hurt feelings and misunderstandings rather than glossing over them in the name of keeping peace. It felt both uncomfortable and liberating. 3 months later, I received a phone call that would test all the progress we had made. Kyle's voice was shaky when he called me at the office on a Tuesday morning. "Chloe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is the job offer for Megan still real? Because she's been talking about going back to school for teaching, and I'm worried that she's going to quit the restaurant and leave us in a worse financial position than when we started." The call revealed several things at once. Kyle was still thinking in terms of immediate financial security rather than long-term growth. He was threatened by Megan's renewed sense of purpose and direction. And despite the changes in our family dynamic, he was still comfortable asking me to intervene in his marriage rather than having a direct conversation with his wife. "Kyle, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "I don't know. Talk to her, maybe. Help her understand that she has a good thing going at the restaurant and shouldn't throw it away for some pipe dream about teaching." The phrase pipe dream triggered an immediate anger response in me. It was exactly the kind of dismissive language that had been used to describe my own ambitions for years. The irony that Kyle was now asking me to use similar language to discourage Megan's dreams was not lost on me. "I'm not going to do that," I said firmly. "If you have concerns about your wife's career decisions, you need to discuss them with her directly." And Kyle, calling someone's professional aspirations a pipe dream is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people trapped in situations they've outgrown. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "So you're saying I should just support whatever she wants to do, even if it puts our family at financial risk?" "I'm saying you should have an honest conversation about your concerns and work together to find a solution that honors both your need for security and her need for professional fulfillment. That's what partners do." After hanging up, I found myself thinking about the patterns that kept repeating in my family. The tendency to see dreams as threats rather than opportunities. The habit of asking others to manage difficult conversations rather than facing them directly. The assumption that financial security and personal fulfillment were mutually exclusive rather than potentially complementary. I decided to drive out to the Gilded Spoon that evening to check on operations and, if the opportunity arose, to have a conversation with Megan about her plans. I found her in the office, working on seating charts for an upcoming wedding reception. "These look good," I said, reviewing her work. "The flow from cocktail hour to dinner service should be seamless." "Thanks. I've been thinking a lot about how to create smooth transitions between different parts of an event. It's actually quite similar to lesson planning when you think about it. You're guiding people through an experience that builds towards specific outcomes." Her comment provided the perfect opening. "Speaking of lesson planning, Kyle mentioned that you're considering going back to school for teaching." Her face clouded slightly. "He told you about that? I suppose he asked you to talk me out of it." "He did." I declined. Relief flooded her expression. "Good. I mean, I understand his concerns about money and stability, but I feel like I'm finally figuring out what I actually want to do with my life. I don't want to give that up just because it's complicated." "It doesn't have to be an either-or situation," I pointed out. "There are ways to pursue teaching certification while maintaining your income from the restaurant. Weekend programs, online courses, evening classes. It would take longer, but it would also be less financially risky." "I've looked into that," she said eagerly. "There's a program at the community college that's specifically designed for working adults. I could keep my job here and take classes on my days off. The only challenge would be the student teaching requirement, but even that could potentially be scheduled around restaurant events." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself getting excited about her plans. "Have you thought about how your experience here might actually enhance your teaching? Your learning, project management, customer service, crisis resolution, team coordination. Those are all skills that translate directly to classroom management." "Exactly. And working with event clients has taught me so much about reading people, understanding what they need even when they can't articulate it clearly. That's got to be useful when working with children." We spent the next hour discussing the practical details of pursuing dual careers, and I was impressed by how thoroughly she had thought through the challenges and opportunities. This wasn't an impulsive decision or an escape fantasy. It was a carefully considered plan for building the life she actually wanted. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we were wrapping up the conversation. "How did you know? When you were starting your business, how did you know it was worth the risk?" It was a question I had been asked many times by other entrepreneurs, but coming from Megan, it felt particularly significant. I didn't know, I admitted. I hoped, I planned, I worked as hard as I could, but there were no guarantees. The thing that kept me going was the realization that the risk of failure felt less frightening than the certainty of regret if I didn't try. She nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly how I feel about teaching. I can live with the possibility that it might not work out the way I envision, but I can't live with wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to try. 6 months later, Megan had begun her teaching certification program and was excelling in both her coursework and her restaurant responsibilities. Kyle had eventually come around to supporting her decision, particularly after he saw how her renewed sense of purpose had energized their entire relationship. The real breakthrough came when Megan asked if she could organize an educational outreach program for the Gilded Spoon, bringing local elementary school classes in for lessons about nutrition, food preparation, and hospitality. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that demonstrated how her two interests could enhance each other rather than compete. The program was a huge success, generating positive publicity for the restaurant while giving Megan valuable experience working with children in an educational setting. Parents loved it, teachers requested repeat visits, and local media coverage helped establish the Gilded Spoon as a community-minded business. Standing in the restaurant's dining room watching Megan lead a group of second graders through a lesson about where different foods come from, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Not just because the business was thriving, but because I had played a role in helping someone I cared about discover and pursue their authentic path. The transformation in our family dynamics had been gradual but substantial. Dad had started asking detailed questions about my business strategies and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the hospitality industry. Mom had begun bragging about my success to her friends instead of worrying that it might make me too big for my britches. Kyle had found his footing in his new job and was building a reputation as a reliable, innovative salesperson. But the most significant change was in my relationship with Megan. We had moved from siblings who tolerated each other out of family obligation to friends who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We talked regularly, shared professional advice, and had developed the kind of mutual respect that had been missing for most of our adult lives. The night before Megan's first day of student teaching, she called me at home. I'm terrified, she admitted. What if I'm terrible at this? What if I've been fooling myself about wanting to be a teacher? Then you'll figure it out and adjust your plan accordingly, I said. But Megan, you're not going to be terrible. You're organized, creative, patient, and passionate about helping people learn and grow. Those are exactly the qualities that make great teachers. How do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. But I've learned that most of the time people already know what they need to hear. They just need someone to confirm that their instincts are valid. 3 weeks into her student teaching placement, Megan called again. This time her voice was filled with excitement rather than anxiety. Chloe, I love this. I mean, it's exhausting and challenging and sometimes frustrating, but I absolutely love it. I feel like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. The joy in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt a surge of happiness for her. I'm so proud of you, I said. For having the courage to pursue this, for doing the hard work to make it happen, for not letting fear talk you out of your dreams. I never would have done it without your example, she said. Watching you build your business, seeing how you handled setbacks and challenges, it taught me that taking risks for something you believe in isn't reckless. It's necessary. A year later, Megan completed her certification and was offered a full-time teaching position at the elementary school where she had done her student teaching. She accepted the job but negotiated to continue working part-time at the Gilded Spoon, managing weekend events and special occasions. The arrangement worked perfectly for everyone involved. Megan had the professional fulfillment she craved along with the financial stability Kyle needed. The restaurant benefited from her expertise and institutional knowledge. And I gained something I hadn't expected, a true partner in the family business. Our success became a model for other family members who were struggling with their own career transitions. Kyle's younger brother asked for advice about starting his own business. Mom began volunteering with a literacy program, inspired by Megan's passion for education. Dad, who had always been skeptical of newfangled business ideas, started suggesting innovations for the restaurant based on customer feedback he observed. The night of Megan's first parent-teacher conferences, she invited me to dinner at her house. Kyle was working late, so it was just the two of us, sitting at our kitchen table eating takeout from a local Thai restaurant and talking about her students. "There's this one kid, Tommy," she was saying, "who's incredibly bright but has trouble focusing. His parents think he's being disruptive on purpose, but I can see that he's just bored. He finishes his work in half the time it takes the other kids, then doesn't know what to do with himself." "Sounds familiar," I said with a smile. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Remember how you used to get in trouble for reading ahead in your textbooks? Mrs. Patterson was always telling you to slow down and wait for the rest of the class. And you used to defend her, saying that I needed to learn patience and cooperation." Megan laughed. "I was such a little rule follower. I couldn't understand why you always wanted to push boundaries and try new things. And I couldn't understand why you were so content to color inside the lines." "We're both right in different ways," she said thoughtfully. "The world needs people who push boundaries and people who maintain stability. The problems only come when we don't respect each other's contributions." It was a profound insight, and one that seemed to capture something essential about our family's journey. We had spent years locked in competition, each trying to prove that our approach to life was superior. But the real breakthrough had come when we started seeing our differences as complementary rather than threatening. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. During the Q&A session, someone asked me about the biggest obstacle I had faced in building my business. I could have talked about funding challenges, market competition, or regulatory hurdles. Instead, I found myself talking about family. "The hardest part wasn't the business itself," I said. "It was learning to maintain my relationships with people who couldn't initially see or support my vision. Family members who loved me but didn't understand my choices. Friends who worried that success would change me. Learning to stay connected to those relationships while still pursuing my goals required a different kind of courage than any business decision I've ever made." After the conference, a young woman approached me. She was perhaps 25, well-dressed and articulate, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Ms. Vance, what you said about family resonated with me so much. I'm trying to start my own consulting firm, but every time I make progress my parents find ways to undermine my confidence. They keep suggesting that I get a real job with benefits and security. How do you keep believing in yourself when the people closest to you don't believe in your dreams?" It was a question I had been asked many times, and one that never got easy to answer. "You have to decide whether you're living your life or theirs," I said finally. "That doesn't mean cutting people off or burning bridges. But it does mean accepting that some people won't be able to support your journey until they can see concrete evidence of your success." "But what if they're right? What if I'm being naive or unrealistic?" "Then you'll learn from the experience and adjust your approach." "But what if they are wrong? What if you have capabilities and insights that they can't see yet?" "The only way to find out is to try." The conversation reminded me of my own journey and of how different my life might have been if I had allowed other people's fears and limitations to define my possibilities. It also reminded me of how much my relationship with my family had improved once they were able to see me as I truly was rather than as they had always assumed I would be. That evening, I called Megan to tell her about the conference and the conversation with the young entrepreneur. "It made me think about how hard it must have been for you to watch me leave for New York," I said. "You were trying to protect me from disappointment, weren't you?" "Partly," she admitted. "But I was also protecting myself from the possibility that you might succeed beyond anything I had ever imagined for myself. It was easier to convince myself that your dreams were unrealistic than to examine why I had settled for such small dreams. Do you ever regret the path you chose? Staying local, playing it safe?" "No," she said, and I could hear the certainty in her voice. "I regret the resentment and the competitiveness, but I don't regret the choices themselves. My life is different from yours, but it's still a good life. I have work that fulfills me, a marriage that's stronger than it's ever been, and a relationship with my sister that I treasure. Those are significant accomplishments." She was right. Success wasn't just about building businesses or accumulating wealth. It was about creating a life that aligned with your values and brought you genuine satisfaction. Megan had found her way to that kind of success through a different path than mine, but it was no less valid or impressive. 5 years after that terrible birthday dinner at the Gilded Spoon, I found myself back in the same private dining room for another family celebration. This time it was Megan's graduation party, marking her completion of a master's degree in elementary education. The room was filled with family, friends, colleagues from both the restaurant and the school, and several of her former students who had come to celebrate their favorite teacher. I looked around the room and marveled at how much had changed. Dad was deep in conversation with Kyle about a business idea Kyle was developing. Mom was showing photos of her volunteer work to anyone who would listen. Megan was radiant, surrounded by people who admired and respected her professional achievements. And in the corner where I had once sat alone at a staff table eating bread rolls and wondering how my life had gone so wrong, there was now a comfortable lounge area where guests could mingle and children could play. The space had been transformed from a symbol of exclusion into one of inclusion. During the toasts, Megan stood up to thank everyone for their support. 5 years ago, she said, I thought my life was pretty much set in stone. I had convinced myself that dreams were for other people, that my job was to be practical and responsible and not ask for too much. But sometimes life gives you exactly the wake-up call you need, even when it comes in an unexpected form. She looked directly at me. My sister taught me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. She showed me that taking risks for something you believe in isn't selfish or irresponsible. It's necessary. And she proved that success is something you can achieve without sacrificing your relationships or compromising your values. The room erupted in applause, and I felt tears forming in my eyes. Not just because of her words, but because of the journey we had taken together to get to this moment. We had started as competitors, become adversaries, and finally emerged as true partners in each other's success. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Leo, who was now the general manager of the Gilded Spoon, approached me. "A mess. Vance, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to grow with this company. Working here has changed my life." "You've earned every advancement through your own hard work and dedication," I told him. "I just provided the environment where your talents could flourish." Still, I remember that night 5 years ago when you were sitting at that little table in the corner. I was so angry about how you were being treated, but I was also impressed by how you handled it with such dignity. That taught me something important about leadership under pressure. His words brought the evening full circle for me. That terrible night had been a turning point not just for my family, but for other people who had witnessed what happened. Leo had learned about grace under pressure. Mr. Dubois had learned about the importance of treating every guest with respect regardless of their parents' status. And I had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is not retaliation, but the quiet demonstration of your true worth. As I drove home to New York that night, I reflected on the complex journey that had brought my family to this place of mutual respect and support. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been difficult conversations, hurt feelings, and moments when I wondered if the relationships were worth saving. But in the end, the effort had been justified. Not because everyone had changed into exactly the people I wanted them to be, but because we had all learned to see each other more clearly and to value what each person brought to our shared story. The girl who had once sat alone at a staff table, feeling humiliated and invisible, had grown into a woman who could transform spaces, relationships, and lives. But more importantly, she had learned that true power isn't about dominating others or proving your superiority. It's about creating opportunities for everyone to become their best selves. And sometimes, the most profound victories are the ones where everybody wins.